Hi everybody, my name is Cami. I'm the assistant curator here at Foxfire. I'm in the War Woman cabin today and I've got our wood stove fired up and getting warm for us to bake in today. Some of you wrote in asking us for some frugal recipes, so I've been working my way through the Foxfire book of Appalachian Cookery to bring some recipes that rely pretty much just on pantry staples. So as I was going through, I was looking for stuff that I knew I had in my pantry. Some of the things that I'm going to focus on in these videos are probably mostly baked goods or desserts because I want to focus on using the wood stove oven personally because I want to work on my baking techniques, but also because things like flour, sugar, salt, eggs, those are all things that we tend to keep in our pantries. Some other things that we might focus on too as well though are some chicken recipes or some beans, other things like that that we can pull from our pantry so that we don't have to run to the grocery store. So today I'm going to be making a custard pie. I'll post the recipes on our website, but I'm going to be focusing on just making the custard to go into the pie shell. We do have 2 recipes in the Foxfire Book of Appalachian Cookery for different pie crusts, and I'll post those. They call for lard, which I happen to have in my fridge, but if you don't have lard, you can use butter or you can use coconut oil. Anything that's a solid fat, I wouldn't recommend replacing it with a liquid fat, but something that's solid like butter would be a really good substitute for that. And again, coconut oil if you're vegan for that pie crust. Another option for this recipe is to make Aunt Aries' version, and she actually uses just a simple biscuit dough. So if you have a go-to biscuit dough recipe, whether it's a baking powder biscuit or maybe it's a little bit more involved, that's something that you can use to line your pan in order to create a really nice shell for your custard. So the custard is going to rely on just a few basic staples. So you're going to need 2 eggs. You're going to need 2 tablespoons of sugar, so this isn't really sweet at all. Again, if you don't have sugar on hand, if you happen to run out of it, you can use a sugar substitute, provided it's in equal measure, so something like stevia. Another option would be to use honey, if you have honey on hand. You can also use brown sugar. I am really getting into sorghum molasses, so if you have a molasses and want a little bit more of an intense flavor, you could use something like that as well. So it doesn't call for very much, you just want to kind of adjust the sweetness. So something like honey is going to be sweeter than granulated sugar, so you'll want to use just a little bit less of that. You're going to need just a pinch of salt, so you hardly need anything at all. I'm using just basic table salt. Do keep in mind that if you use kosher salt, which is a little bit larger granules, you want to make sure that you use just a little bit more than that. I would recommend using something with a finer grind, like just a table salt, because we're not heavily mixing this or cooking this, and so you don't want like big chunks of salt accidentally get in there somehow. And then it's going to call for 1.5 cups of milk. I'm using almond milk because that's what we have in our fridge right now. Obviously it's a custard, and if you are inclined towards dairy, then definitely go with as full fat of milk as possible. Some places have suggested that you can increase the fat in a milk by simply adding butter. It does create some separation and emulsification issues, so I would look into that and make sure you're doing it properly. But if you have like a skim milk or an almond milk, you can add a little bit of fat into it to kind of bulk it up a bit, give it a little bit more of a creamier texture. And then finally, you're just going to need a teaspoon of nutmeg or cinnamon. I brought my 3 favorites, and I'm going to do a blend of these because I do this in pretty much anything that calls for cinnamon or those fall spices that we love. I've got some cinnamon here, but I also love to mix that with ginger and cardamom. But again, whatever you have in your pantry is what you should use. If there's a certain flavor that you like, or if you don't like cinnamon, you can just add in a little bit of vanilla or almond extract just to give it a little bit of extra flavor. The thing about a wood stove is it takes a really long time for it to come to temperature. So it's only at about 150, 200 degrees. So we've got a firebox here on the left hand side of the stove, and this is where I just keep putting in a little bit of wood. As that wood burns, I've closed off the dampers, so actually the stove top is probably hot enough to cook on now, but I've closed off the dampers to kind of direct that heat more towards the oven. So we're really lucky that we actually have a temperature gauge on the front. And and it's telling me that we're still a ways off from being ready to bake, which is just fine because that gives us time to prep our custard. And then I might actually do a quick blind bake of our pie shell. So to get started, we are just gonna mix the eggs with the sugar. Okay, and then we are going to whisk in 2 tablespoons of sugar. Now, this recipe is pretty well written. A lot of the recipes in this cookbook don't actually have measurements or exact measurements. So a lot of times you'll see 2 tablespoons written, but if there are no other exact measurements in the recipe, you can pretty much safely assume that those 2 tablespoons were pretty much an eyeball estimate. So you can just take a spoon, 2 spoonfuls, and probably guess that that's good. I'm going to start with my whisk here and just mix those up really well. So this isn't like a typical cookie recipe or anything where we're creaming the eggs and the sugar and the milk together, but you do want to make sure that it's really well beaten and well mixed up. You may want to look for a little bit of frothiness at the top as an indicator. You knew I was baking, didn't you? I'm coming to see the food. Okay, so that's pretty well mixed up. Now I want to just add my salt in. Now this recipe says to just add a pinch of salt, so that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to pour a little bit in my hand and just sprinkle that over in there. So we actually have this cabin set up in a 1940s homestead, and it's possible that then they would have had some sort of dry sink, but most people still didn't have plumbing or a lot of indoor electricity. So I'm actually using a dry measure for my milk. But you should use a liquid measure just to get it as accurate as possible. But when I'm cooking from the book of Appalachian Cookery, I kind of have this spirit of the past that doesn't necessarily rely on precise measurements as we do today. So I don't feel too bad about it. I feel like Annie Long would be okay with it. So we're just going to put in 1.5 cups of milk. Okay. So that is actually all the milk I have. Again, I would recommend using a dairy product, but if you are a vegan or if you have dairy restrictions, it is okay to use a substitute. So I'm going to mix that in, okay? And then we're going to add our spices. Now it calls for a teaspoon of nutmeg or cinnamon. Since I'm doing kind of a mashup of spices, I'm going to just take my 1/2 teaspoon measurement and put in as much as I feel like I want with my other spices. Ginger can be quite strong. The ginger I have is a little bit old, so I tend to go a little bit heavy on the ginger, but if you are interested in trying these, I call them my chai spices. So if you do want to try these 3, I'd recommend doing a 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon and then a 1/4 teaspoon of ginger and a 1/4 teaspoon of cardamom. So we're just going to get those in there and mix it all up. And you want to make sure that you mix it really well because the spices will tend to like float a little bit, so you want to make sure that they get in there as much as possible. So I'm just going to mix this up really quick. And this is a good time to go ahead and add any extracts or any other flavors that you feel like you want. And this is a really great blank slate, so you have a lot of opportunity to kind of make it your own flavor. And I'm just going to leave this for a minute, and I'm going to go get my pie crust and get it ready to blind bake for just a few minutes, just to kind of firm up that bottom. And then I'm going to throw it in the oven and make sure that we're up to temperature. Okay, so we have blind baked our pie crust, and our oven is finally getting up to temperature. It takes about 45 minutes for a wood stove to heat up, sometimes longer. So I have just baked this pie crust. In a normal oven, you probably want to bake it at about 350, 375 for 10 to 15 minutes, just until it starts to get light golden brown. The recipe again does not call for this, but I like to do it to avoid what Mary Berry loves to call soggy bottoms. So we're just going to give our little custard one last whisk up, and then you're just going to pour it in. I'm using a deep dish pie crust. You can use a shallower pie crust as well because it is, just 2 eggs. So then we are going to put this in our oven. You want to make sure that at this point your oven has been preheated to 400 degrees. We're just going to bake it in there for a few minutes, and then we'll reduce the temperature on your electric or gas oven not so much the wood stove, we're just gonna go with it. Okay, so our pie is in the oven. It's going to bake at 400 for 10 minutes, and then we're going to reduce the temperature to 325 and bake it for another 20 or 30 minutes. What you're looking for at this point is for it to just be set. So if you wiggle it, it shouldn't wobble too much. It should be pretty solid looking. You also might want to keep an eye on the perimeter of your pie crust, around those edges. If it starts to get a little too dark brown, you can always take just a little bit of aluminum foil and create kind of a pie shield around the edge of your crust there so it doesn't burn. So we're just going to leave this in the oven. For me, I'm going to keep it at the highest temperature as I can because we are working with a wood stove. And then in about 20 or 30 minutes, I'll check it and hopefully it'll be done. Okay, so it's been about 40 minutes and our pie has been baking away in our wood stove oven. It's maintained a pretty consistent temperature of about 350 degrees Fahrenheit. You can actually get it a little bit hotter if you push it towards the back left corner of the oven. So this right here is the firebox, and the closer you get to the firebox, the hotter the temperature will be. I've actually had to rotate it every 5 minutes or so because you can actually see the quadrants of the pie crust getting browner based on where it's located next to the firebox. So I'm going to go ahead and pull it out and we can take a look at it. So as you can see, it's pretty well set, doesn't have much of a wobble going on, and it's pretty evenly browned around the edges. It does seem as though the base of the oven is not level and all of the spices and some of the liquid seem to have shifted to one side. But you know, what can you do in an old wood stove? So hopefully you had better results aesthetically in your electric oven or gas oven. So now we're just going to let this cool to room temperature, so probably about an hour or two, and then we'll serve it up. The recipe suggests serving it with meringue. I'm a huge fan of ice cream, so I think we'll probably be dishing this up with a healthy scoop of vanilla ice cream. Please check our blog. I'll be posting all of our content there, including all of the recipes and some tips and tricks for this particular pie. That's available at www.foxfire.org/journal. And please check back. We'll be posting some more videos during this time of quarantine. And feel free to shoot us more suggestions or ideas or share your baking by tagging us. That's just #Foxfire. So thanks, and we'll see you next time.